Welcome to Explore. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. I'm the Executive Director for the Campbell River and District Chamber of Commerce. We are coming to you live to tape from the Shaw Spotlight Studios on Robron Road in Campbell River. And our guest today is Ken Blackburn. Now, Ken has multiple roles in the city. One is the Executive Director for the Campbell River Arts Council, and the other is working with the museum at Campbell River in all public programming. Do I have that right?
That's right, Mary Ruth.
All right. Well, before we get into that, we've talked about this before, but I really want to go over this again because I was so shocked the first time I learned this. Can you please tell us, in one brief statement, where you grew up, what was your first big job, and when you first went to college?
I grew up in Ottawa. My first big job was in mining in the Yukon.
Again, there's the shocking part.
I had started university after high school and dropped out and wanted to explore the world, so I traveled and then ended up working in Whitehorse Copper Mine in the Yukon.
Wow.
And then ended up in a number of mines. And it was, after about 10 years of mining, it was thinking I didn't want that to be the end of the story. So I went back to school, and I went back to university at Queen's and took fine art, much to the chagrin of my family, who wasn't pleased because I had dropped out of pre-med, heading for medical school, and changed to fine art. So they weren't happy, but it ended up being the course that I took in life.
But you were happy because that was your passion.
I discovered my passion
right.
Over the traveling years and working years.
Yeah. Now, when you were working in the mines, were you actually down in the mines doing the actual mining, or were you kind of in the office? Like, what were you doing?
I was in the mills.
Oh, you
so
were
I was
in the
on
mills?
the surface.
Okay.
Yeah, I spent some time underground, not much though, but
Okay.
mostly in the mills where you process the ore that comes up from underground.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
See, that particular, what I find fascinating about people's journeys is they are so surprising. They're not what you think. Like, because I've known you for almost a decade now through the work here at Shaw, if someone was to say to me, what do you think Ken's background is? I would say, I'll bet you he was doing set design all through high school with all of the theatrical productions, and then went right into a fine arts degree and went to Emily Carr and ended up where he is now. And then when I found out the actual path that you ended up taking, I was shocked. It's so interesting that people veer off and go these different directions, and how you circled back and found your passion. And I think that is the message that's really important for anybody watching this, is that it's never too late to find your passion.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's a message that's really important for youth. You know, I think we all go through difficult teenage years and enter our, some of us enter our 20s, not sure what it is they want to do. There's a lot of pressure, I think, in culture and society to conform, to find your path, get on it. But it doesn't have to be that kind of route. For me, it took the 10 years of my 20s to kind of wake up, in a sense that I was on a path that I wasn't sure why I was on it, except that I was skilled at it. I was all science and math in high school. I took no art or literature courses. English was required, but that was it. I had no interest in the arts, and it just became it just became something that awoke in me in my 20s. And once awakened, it took hold, and there was no denying it. So,
and no turning back.
And no turning back, no. So.
Was there a moment in time where you saw a sculpture or a piece of art or something that caught your eye for the very first time, and you went, wow, why am I interested in that?
Yes, I had an epiphany, almost like, what's that old parable, Paul on the road to Damascus. Yeah, I was in Vancouver, it was actually in mid-70s, and a little bit of the crazy days, just kind of hanging out in a house, and we were partying and doing all sorts of manner of things. And I had to kill some time downtown one day, and I walked by the old Vancouver Art Gallery, and they were having a retrospective on Emily Carr. And I had heard of Emily Carr, but I didn't know much about her. I knew the name. I thought, and it was a free admission day.
Oh, okay.
And I walked in and went in, looked at the paintings, and yeah, I thought, this is art. Like, this is more than just a pretty picture. There's something going on here. And it did. Something woke up. And I left the gallery and went directly to the library and went to the art section and discovered people like De Chirico, and of course, people like Van Gogh, and just from a history book that I picked up, the history of art. El Greco, I think, was probably the one that really triggered, and that started it. I just thought, there's more here than just something that's attractive to look at and pretty. There's actually something philosophical or something very at the root of humanity that's happening here, and that led me to read a lot about art. Over the next, say, year or two, never thinking about being an artist, just thinking about, learning about it. And then at a certain point, it thought, you can participate in this too. You don't just have to study it, but you can actually participate. And I don't think art is about whether something's good or bad or not. It's about the discovery process of being a person and engaging with the processes of art. So I started actually painting. I just bought tubes of paint and brushes and just started painting, and then that became a progression that led me to think. I was disillusioned with working in mining. Maybe maybe I'll go back to school. And what was I going to study if I went back to school? I looked into fine art and thought, wow, you can actually study this and learn. I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. So that's what I did.
Wow. Now, where did you actually, it was Queens that
Queens,
you went to?
yeah.
Okay.
I'd started at Queens and dropped out in 75 or so, and then ended up going back around 85 and went back to Queens. Just why Queens? Just because I was still in their registration system. And when I contacted them, I was still technically active in their system. And so I said, well, I want to change my major. So, I had to go through an interview and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was just the easier route than applying cold to something. I didn't have to go through really an application process. So.
Now, you did your whole, is it a BFA? Bachelor
did
of Fine
my
Arts?
BFA at Queens, and did my master's at the University of Windsor.
Oh, really? I didn't even know Windsor had an art program.
It has a very interesting art program because it's so influenced by Detroit.
Of course,
and it's very American kind of oriented. A lot of the professors there are American. Yeah. So you get a very different perspective in Windsor. Unlike any other place I've been in Canada, visiting or talking at different universities, Windsor is really unique in its approach. So I love Detroit. It's just it was such a crazy city.
Yeah.
I mean, dangerous city, but it was really crazy. Wonderful music scene.
So what years were you in Detroit or in Windsor?
I would have been in Windsor from 88 to 90, 2 years. Yeah.
Those were the best years.
The Pistons won back-to-back championships, so that was really fun.
Yeah, and the Detroit Tigers would have just won under Sparky Anderson, or I guess
just
that was a bit
me.
early.
Yeah.
Did you get to Greektown?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
Xochimilcos was one of our. Oh no, Xochimilcos, sorry, is over in Mexican Village, but Greektown. Yeah, we went to the two of them because they were very safe places to go at night. They were sort of self-policed.
Yeah.
As opposed to going more into the inner city, which wasn't really a good idea at night.
No.
But Greektown and the Mexican Village, they were sort of our two hangouts.
And again, like talking about the music scene and the art scene in that area of Detroit, just fantastic in those years.
Totally, the blues bars were unbelievable. Yeah, and really a good introduction to me to black culture, which growing up in Ontario or in Ottawa. didn't have a lot of exposure to it, you know.
Right.
But to actually be there and kind of be amongst it and live, especially in the music scene, was really powerful. And it was again unbelievable. I was blessed to have that kind of opportunity, you know. So.
Well, and it's so after that, how did you end up on the West Coast? Like, how did you go from your master's in Windsor to what was next?
Well, I started a phase, I worked internationally. So, of course, like everybody else, had student debts coming out of school. And I got an opportunity to go to Japan to teach English. And I went to Japan for 3 years and basically paid off debts. And then came back, and because of my international experience, I got involved with Canada World Youth and ended up working in Egypt and Russia, Ukraine, you know, Vietnam, Ecuador.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I did that for another 10 years till about 2000.
Yeah.
And then the other story that's a backbeat of everybody's life is love. And because of a love, with a girlfriend at the time who was studying art therapy in Montreal from BC, wanted to move back to BC and back to the island because her family was here.
Oh, okay.
And I said, okay, well, I'll come out and take a look. You know, I hadn't been to the island. I certainly knew Vancouver area, and came out, and she had gotten a place in Black Creek. And again, end of story. I mean, once I saw how she was right on Saratoga Beach.
Iconic.
And I thought, oh my God, why would I go back to Montreal? You know, so so I'm still here.
Wow.
And that was in like 2004 or so.
And Sarasota Beach is just spectacular. What a great introduction to the island.
Exactly. It couldn't have been. Yeah, it was, again, blessed is a good word.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate to just be somehow in the right place at the right
At the
time.
right time.
So, yeah.
So when did you start at the museum?
2005.
Okay.
And Arts Council 2006.
So. Okay, so, and we're heading into upwards of almost 20 years in both.
It's going to be 18 years.
Yeah,
crazy.
Awesome. So in all of the years at the museum, maybe give us an overview of what it is you actually do at the museum.
So I'm the program manager, so all public programs are my responsibility. So anything to do with lectures, anything to do with workshops, anything to do with the community tours, really any kind of programming that's not schools, because there is a school programmer.
Right.
So I do all of the public programming there, which has, you know, coming out of, so Canada World Youth job was international development and looking at how communities work and how they function and what are the roles of the sectors and the relationships between, you know, economic, social, or cultural sectors. And of course, environment has been added to that now. So I had a good foundation in understanding sort of the mechanics of communities and the important way that they operate. So programming and community outreach work was perfect because gave me an opportunity to put in place programming that I feel, you know, assists with community development and especially cross-cultural development. So yeah, again, perfect kind of situation to be in, and to be able to build programs that you know, are fostering community gathering spaces, which is you know, a way to redefine what a museum is. A museum's just not about old artifacts. It's actually a living, and then of course I brought the term living history to the museum, which we use now. You know, history's alive, and how is it alive? So we look at programming that talks about history that's ongoing now. So you know.
And in various parts of Vancouver Island, there is a lot of history around immigrant kind of centers. Like Cumberland had a very strong Chinese population for a long time, and so with what is going on over the last 10 years, and now it's ramping up even more, bringing more immigrants and refugees to Canada and to Campbell River, is that sort of providing you with another new opportunity to expand that community programming to make it more inclusive of everybody coming from other countries?
Certainly. I mean, the opportunities are there. We have the Immigrant Welcome Center here does great work. We try not to, duplicate programs, but certainly reach out to them. I think more that's one part of it, but more what's sort of percolated to the surface in the last number of years is reconciliation and the relationship with First Nations. And as we're working with our programming, both at the museum and at the Arts Council, of cultural reconnection, which is, quite central to, I think culture in general. And of course, the historic connections between what reconnection means now and based on, sort of past traumas of residential schools and kind of the reawakening, I think, of a lot of First Nations culture is really positive. And of course, the UN has just declared the next 10 years the decade of language revitalization. So in the programming, through Art and Earth, for example, that we do at the Arts Council, this is a year where we're going to start looking at this cultural reconnection. And what does cultural reconnection mean in terms of the environment? And as soon as you start talking about reconnection in terms of environment, you have to talk about language, because language is based in location and in environment and in geography, really. So, and once you start talking about language, then you start getting insight into culture and how it developed. And then we're talking about reconnection. So there's this wonderful loop of culture to language to geography to environment to reconnection that we're going to start trying to put some of these programs together.
Okay. I think what's been really fascinating for me anyway is to watch the change in the language. And what I mean by that is 5-6 years ago, reconciliation was the word that everybody was just starting to use. And then in the last 18 months, maybe 2 years, it is transitioning to decolonization. And now I'm starting to hear, and you're not the first person, but literally in the last couple of months, I've started to hear this reconnection word. So it's fascinating to me to literally be living through this history, which in 50 years is going to be documented in this way, but we are living through the transition through all of these stages of the language and how we're framing it around our relationship with the First Nations and the Indigenous peoples of Canada.
Yeah, totally. There's huge changes happening right now, and it's shaping institutions. Like the museum yesterday. I know our curator Beth they're Zooming with the Haida Nation, talking about repatriation of cultural objects that we house in the collection here. And that's reshaping how museums are viewing their own collections and how they're cooperating with other museums to try to adjust that history. And the same thing, they talk about decolonizing databases and how cataloging happens. And once you start seeing how systems are structured through cultural lenses, there is an awakening that happens because they're biases that have been blind spots for a lot of years, and because of different histories kind of colliding. But we're having kind of an opportunity to be able to learn together, because it's new for everybody. I mean, we're learning so much from First Nations cultures, especially with their oral histories. They have preserved an awful lot of culture that is now awakening, I think, all of us together. So you're right, it's a transitional time, and it's just a time of such awesome opportunity to evolve,
Now, with your 18 years working in the museum world, let's talk about the Royal British Columbia Museum down in Victoria. So it's undergoing now, like right this month, a public consultation where it's inviting everybody and anybody in the whole province of BC to call, to email, to let them know what we want to see in a provincial museum. Now, the RBC is a huge tourist draw in Victoria and for Vancouver Island. And there is a danger that it actually could go away and become something totally different, which would be a huge economic impact to the island, because it is such a tourist draw, not only for Victoria, but for the whole island. So in all of your conversations that you've had over the last year, when that announcement was first made about this is what we're going to do, and then everybody went, whoa, you're going to do what? In terms of tearing down the current building, building a new building, and they felt that there was no public consultation and they had to backtrack on what they were doing, which is where we are now. Like, from being somebody who's been working in that space, what is your take on this, and what would you recommend to the general public that we do to participate in this conversation?
Well, it's a complicated question. I mean, it's not a simple answer, but the number one thing is to educate yourself. I mean, that if, you know, the task of asking the public what they should do is fraught with pitfalls, and it's like a minefield. Because it quickly becomes political, and it quickly becomes based on agendas. And, but you really need people to be educated as to what is a museum, first of all, and what is it representing, and whose voices are being represented, and how did they get there, and what rights do those voices and artifacts have. You know, traditional museums really have been based on kind of colonial acquisitions.
Right.
The idea that you could take anything you wanted because it was for your curiosity cabinet back home, and it was seen as something that was, you know, something to be kind of looked at and seen as exotic and
Right.
different. But those artifacts don't mean that to the peoples that created them. They've got very different significance. So we, the Canadian public, or the BC public, say, or even the Vancouver public, however you want to divide it for the discussion, need to learn what that means. Because how can you shape a new museum if you don't understand the perspective of what these different voices are, and what do they represent? So it's a tough task. And maybe they have to dismantle it before it can be rebuilt again. You know, the fact that it's a big tourist draw and a big economic generator and stuff, well, maybe it's actually generating revenue for the wrong reason, and it's only perpetrating biases and kind of traditional power relationships and struggles. Okay. So that, you know, we always kind of default to economics, but I think we're on the wrong track when we do that. If it's going to be an economic hit, well, too bad. Sometimes you've got to go backwards to go forward. So education is key. Listening is key too. You know, you've got to listen to the people who are the experts and who are bringing perspectives to it, and you've got to pay attention and be willing and open to learn. So that's a general roadmap. It's not saying we're going to do this, 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 and this, but that's where it has to start. Because right. Otherwise you're just going to, you know, look at the comment section on social media anytime and just see how wacky it is with people that just like to voice their opinions and you know, rant and rave. I mean, that
aren't based in anything.
No, right. It's based on pre-digested biases and so, I mean, that's not useful to just say we're going to listen to the population. Well, you know, I'm sorry, but generally the population has no idea what they're talking about. So, but they've certainly got an opinion, you know. Right. So, yeah, I think education's key, and that really is a long, slow process. Has to start in school. You know, we've got to start teaching kids differently as to what these subjects are. You know, people say, well, what's the value of geography, for example? Geography is probably the most fundamental subject that has to be taught because of what we just said. It's the root of culture, it's the root of language, and how can you understand a community in a place if you don't understand the geography, the climate, you know, the weathers. Right. And now we've got climate change, environmental problems. Yes. How can you talk about that if you don't understand the geographies of it? So, you know, everything's been pushed towards these jobs. You know, you got to get people into you know, all these sectors, especially technology sectors taken over, and the economic sector. And what's the value of these traditional kind of history, geography? But that has to be rethought as to how it's taught, because we'll have a different awareness then.
Well, and I think that as we've seen in other countries that shall remain nameless, is that there is one of the things that seems to be missing from our education system, more so in other countries, is critical thought. Right? Like that it doesn't seem to really exist anymore.
No, it's a shame. And what do they got first? And I just said geography and history. They got the arts.
Right.
You know, and if you're going to create critical observation that goes alongside with critical thinking, it's the arts that foster that.
Yeah.
That's, you know, this is why places like Harvard Medical School have integrated art courses into their medical degrees, because surgeons and technicians or anybody doing any kind of interpretation of what they're looking at have to be taught how to see. And we take seeing for granted, but no. It's like listening skill. People think, oh, I can listen, but there's a difference between hearing and listening. So when you train people to observe and to listen, like a music program or like an art program or a literature program or a film program or a dance program, you're teaching critical skills. And so if that's the ambition, then we have to be supporting these subjects that do that. And, you know, the truth is that you can get students to study these things. They don't all become artists. You know, it's that they become better professionals in whatever they go into, because it enhances them as a person. But, you know, I mean, anybody that says, oh, the last thing we need are more artists in the world, you know, well, actually that's totally false. We do need more artists, but that's not why you study these subjects. You study them to complement everything else in the curriculum. So.
Now, we are almost out of time. So let's very quickly talk about the Art and Earth. Is it Art and Earth or Earth?
Art and Earth.
Art and Earth Festival for this year. Give us the lowdown on what the plans are and where people can find more information, because it's fantastic every year. I'm looking forward to this year.
Yeah, so it's at this point it's defining what the themes are going to be, and I say it's going to be cultural reconnection through the environment with language revitalization. A bit of a mouthful, but that's the kind of programming that we're going to try to support. The main festival itself is in September. 22nd to 24th, and that's when we'll have like the Haig Brown lecture and the Art and Earth lecture. And so we're going to look at those subjects to be the lecturer this year. And then we're still building how that programming would look, you know. So.
And you often do something on Earth Day.
And we'll do something on Earth Day, the 22nd. David Carpenter, the writer, environmental writer, will be at the museum giving a talk that day on his new book, which very much looks at climate change and its effect on species and things. So he'll be there 22nd May, Oceans Day, June. We'll be talking with the Aquarium and Maritime Heritage Center. And then Earth Day, of course, is when the traditional Haig Brown Festival is, and we build Art and Earth around that festival.
Rivers Day in September.
Sorry.
So all of that information can be found.
It will be found.
Will be found.
Yeah, on the Arts Council's website. Or there's also art. If you just Google Art and Earth Festival, it will come up. It is being under construction right now because the Arts Council had our entire website hacked and we've had to dismantle it. It's work's being done right now, though.
Oh, no.
It's crazy. It still happens.
All right. Well, Ken Blackburn, thank you so much for joining me for this Explore episode. That has been fascinating. I learned so much today.
Great. It's always a pleasure, Mary Ruth. We've talked many times over the years. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Art and Earth Festival, check out the website in the next couple of weeks as that unfolds, the programming. Participate in Earth Day. It's always great, and the lecture is going to be fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Explore. Please join us again.